welcome to this week's episode of Not D&D, brought to you by EN World. As always, I am your host, Jessica, and I'm joined this week by Colin LeSueur. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So we met very briefly last month at the UK Games Expo, and I saw Runecairn, and I thought it was very, very cool. So I wanted to come on here and talk to you about it so everyone else can learn more. But before we jump into that, I'm going to be very nosy and talk about you as a person, because all I know about you really is that you make Runecairn and then you were at the UK Games Expo. So the question I have for you is your background with role-playing games and TTRPGs. Do you remember your first game that you ever played?
Yeah, so I first started playing in the early 90s because I was Canadian, so I was born and raised in Canada. And the first game I played was AD&D second edition, so Advanced Dungeons and Dragons second edition.
Fantastic.
I was introduced. Yeah, it was kind of like that was like a peak time for second edition at least. But I was introduced to it from or by a friend of mine. He's a bit older than I was, and he'd been playing for a while. So yeah, he got me into that, and we played stuff like TMNT, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles role-playing game.
Turtle Power, I love it.
Yeah, I was a massive turtle head back in the day.
Turtle head, oh, that's amazing. Yeah, of course. Sorry. Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah, I love Ninja Turtles. And played other stuff like Marvel, the Marvel Superheroes one, Heroes Unlimited. And yeah, so that's kind of what started me into like tabletop role-playing games. Was like everyone, or like a lot of people, D&D was my entry point.
Yeah, the gateway drug into this whole world. And obviously since then, from being somebody that enjoys playing games, you've become somebody that publishes games. What was that journey like for you? How did you approach that process?
So I had a bit of a break from role-playing games. So probably for about 20 years, I just stopped playing, didn't follow the scene at all. And then I moved over to the UK and wanted to wanted to get back into it because I'd joined this like meetup group or like a meetup group website.
Oh yeah,
just to find different things to do, like and someone was like hosting a D&D game. So that's spurred on these like old memories that unlocked, and I was like, yeah, I could try that again. So I started playing 3.5, D&D 3.5, and then eventually started running my own games and started playing Pathfinder, and then decided to gather up some adventures that I'd written and publish it as a module, just because I thought, why not? Like, I enjoyed doing it, and it was an excuse to get back into art, like drawing and painting. And so I thought, yeah, I'd publish it, and I chose 5th edition because that was the biggest. There's the elephant in the room. The biggest one out there. Yeah. And then so I started with 5e modules and then moved on to like bigger and better things, which is not D&D.
Sure. What made you decide to explore things that are not D&D? Because I know like Dungeons and Dragons is one of the the biggest and most popular games in the industry. So as a third-party creator making products for that, you've obviously got a bigger audience, and it's kind of an easier sell than doing kind of indie games. What made you want to kind of explore that side of the industry?
Well, I wanted to I'd started seeing other games coming out, and like started hearing about OSR games, and like learning that there's a whole other scene that's like an offshoot or like more indie than like mainstream D&D 5e and Pathfinder stuff. And I wanted to make my own Dark Souls role-playing game.
Nice.
And yeah, because I was a big Dark Souls fan. And there wasn't really one out there at the time. So I thought, I'll just find the right system, and then I can turn that into a Dark Souls game. And so that kind of led me down the road of like Cairn and Into the Odd, and that kind of offshoot like that, the OSR, NSR scene. And so that's what I did. I built my own Dark Souls game, which is what became Runecairn.
Well, that segues us very nicely to talking about Runecairn then. So for people that aren't kind of familiar with it, it's a Norse kind of fantasy setting, and as you said, Dark Souls was the inspiration. So what were your inspirations in making this game with the kind of the Norse fantasy setting and all those elements? What went into you wanting to make this game?
It was like a kind of like some things that came together really well. Because in Dark Souls, there's the concept of death and rebirth. Like when you die, you respawn at a bonfire, like a typical video game mechanic. But it's more mechanized in Dark Souls. Like it's built into the story too, where like it's a cycle. The world gets destroyed and reborn, and that follows nicely into Norse mythology with the concept of Ragnarok, where the world is destroyed and then reborn after that. And in some versions of mythology, of the Norse mythology, it's a cycle, so it happens over and over and over. So I thought it would make sense to marry those two together, to have the mechanics of Souls-like and the setting and theme of like Norse fantasy. So that's kind of fit well together, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And the game is what I really liked about it is it's a 2-player game, and I think there's often a lot of people looking for 2-player games that you can play instead of, because if you can't get a whole party together, it's much more easier to coordinate schedules with 2 people. And you have one playing the Warden and one playing the Adventurer. Obviously, you've mentioned that the rules inspiration is by Cairn and Into the Odd. But could you give us an overview of what the gameplay is and how the mechanics work in Runecairn?
Sure. I always like to say that if you know D&D, or if you know the kind of standard D20 systems, then you'll know Cairn and Into the Odd. It shares a lot of the same DNA. It's a D20 roll under system. So when it comes to skill checks and saves, the lower you roll, the better. So a 1 is a critical success, or 1 is a success, and a 20 is a fail, for instance.
Yeah.
But the thing about Cairn and Into the Odd that's really interesting is that there are no to-hit rolls, so you hit automatically, and you just roll for your damage. And then the form that takes, it's different depending on each flavor, but like in Runecairn, it's mitigated by armor, and you can also react to enemy attacks, so you can dodge out of the way and not even and avoid the attack before it happens. So yeah, Cairn Into the Odd, the philosophy behind it is all about it's not quite fiction first. Like, it's not a narrative system. It's kind of halfway between a narrative system and like a crunchy tactical system. So you can if something is impossible, then you won't be able to do it. Like, no matter how well you roll, and if something there's a line in the book where it's like a dagger to the back will kill you. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter how well trained you are, what armor you're wearing, that sort of thing. And there's this key element of inventory and slot management in Cairn and Into the Odd. So what you carry is basically determines what you can do, and your abilities so you're limited by your inventory space, and you can, if you gain fatigue, so either through story elements or through not eating enough over a few days, or an enemy attack can give you fatigue, you gain that in your inventory as an item, as a slot. And so you carry that with you. And the more inventory slots you have taken up, the more open you are to damage. So if you've got a full inventory, then you're basically open to attack. So it's interesting, mix of risk reward and what you carry and what you do, and then that's carried over through to Runecairn in the combat that I've got.
Fabulous. And I suppose, as you mentioned, combat sounds quite lethal. Like, going into combat is something you don't take lightly. Like, you can go into it and you may die, but I guess that feeds into the Dark Souls thing that you can die, but that's not the end of the story, right?
Exactly. Yeah, the tagline is "Death is not the end." So if you die in combat, so Cairn and Into the Odd are generally pretty deadly systems. But if you're, so you have to play a bit more carefully. You have to be a bit more. You have to plan things out. And it's the same as in Runecairn, but you've got a bit more leeway because if you die, you'll respawn at the bonfire. So you can't do that unlimited times. Every time you die, you lose a little piece of yourself, and your health goes down as well. So it's kind of like a death spiral. The more you die, the more likely you are to die. And once you lose all your vigor, once your vigor hits 0, that means you're basically lost. Like, you're not dead, but you're no longer yourself. You lose all of your humanity, and you just wander as a hollowed shade.
Oh. Well, there are some fates worse than death, aren't there? That's what that sounds like. You're still physically there, but just a shell as... well, lovely. So in the game, which I mentioned before, it is a 2-player game. You have one warden and one adventurer. So how does that work? Like, what goes into character creation, and what sort of characters are we playing in the game?
So character creation is pretty quick. You can I've got a random character generator on the Runecairn website that you can use to generate one in about 5 seconds.
Perfect.
But you can also because it's essentially weapon as class. So when you're creating a character, you've got backgrounds. So you can be a skald, a warrior, a seer, that sort of thing. But because it's a background, it's who you were in a previous life. So before this life, that determines who you are, or that determines what items you carry when you start the game. Because you've died in a previous life and you wake up carrying the items that you had when you died. But that doesn't define who you are going forward. So the items you carry, that'll determine what skills you have, so what you can do in combat. But if you wanted to change your approach, if you wanted to change from being a warrior type to a skald or a seer type, then you just swap out your weapon, pick up a staff and some rune stones, and then you can cast spells. You can cast seer spells with that. So it's pretty dynamic on what you want to do. But so the warden is the GM essentially, and because the combat's a bit more dynamic, it works best with one GM and one player, because the player can react to enemy attacks. So if you've got a lot of players in combat, then it can potentially get a bit sticky. But that said, you can still play Runecairn with multiple players, but it's kind of designed to work best with one player, like one adventurer and one warden.
Fantastic. And also you've mentioned, mentioned in the back of the book, it says actually that there is a solo play variant as well. How does that differ?
So the solo play, it uses a couple of different solo tools. So there's a favor or sorrow table that you can roll on. So if it's a simple question, so it's an oracle, or it's like a table that you roll on to replace the GM. So if it's a simple question like, has this enemy seen me? You can roll on the favor or sorrow table, and how well you roll determines the outcome. Like, it could be that no, the enemy hasn't seen you, or it could be yes, they've seen you and they've alerted a guard. So there's different levels of good or bad essentially in the favor or sorrow. And then if it's a more in-depth question, then there's an oracle, a rune-based oracle. So there's 3. You can roll on a series of tables, and that'll give you 3 keywords, and then you can use those keywords and interpret the result into the answer to your question, basically. So it's designed to kind of simulate or replicate a warden. And then there's a series of random tables that you can roll on to generate an excursion or a delve. So if you want to roll up a random cairn that you're going to visit, then you can roll up an objective and an encounter for each room and that sort of thing. And then following these, rolling on these random tables will determine how well you do, or what kind of what kind of adversaries you encounter and that sort of thing.
Fantastic. You've kind of mentioned it a bit there in the solo variant, but obviously when the Warden's creating the adventure for the adventurer or adventurers to go on, I was just wondering how you structure that and what sort of stories that you'll be telling. I think you kind of gave an overview a little bit with the solo version, but could you talk about how that would work in a non-solo game? Like, how would you structure the adventure? What are we doing as adventurers? What stories are we exploring?
So yeah, they're the stories of epic adventure, essentially. So there's in the book, there's like a table, or there's like a list of potential adventures or potential encounters that the adventurers can have, like hunting down hunting down the beast that's terrorizing a village, or delving into ancient ruins to find a mystical artifact, that sort of thing. So like ideas of set in like a Viking Age world, but also a world that's been reborn after Ragnarok. So all of the old gods are either dead or missing, but there's still like traces of old magic that exists in the world. And there's like strange creatures that are roaming the different the Nine Realms. So it's like exploration, adventure, combat. So yeah, it's like when you think of like Viking high adventure, that's kind of like, those are the type of adventures you'd have.
Fantastic. And if somebody was looking to be a warden and run a game, what sort of guidance would you give them for their first game that they run of this?
So there's actually in the book, there's an example of there's both a character creation example and an example of combat. So it'll walk you through how to how to structure combat, how to deal with it as a warden, and also how to create an adventure as a player. But I think there's principles in the book as well at the beginning. This is leading on from Cairn, where it'll say like the principles of how to approach the game as a warden, and how to approach the game as a player. So just like tips on what to expect, like it's setting expectations if you're new to role-playing games.
Yeah.
Or if you're coming from something like D&D 5e, it'll say like how things are a bit different here, how you approach the world, that sort of thing. So there's like guidance in the principles.
Fantastic. And what are some of those principles, to pick like one or two out to give us a taster of them?
So there's like principles of the world, for instance, for the player. Paraphrasing here, but it's like
Sure.
if you if you fail at something, come back later and try again. There's some secrets will never be found. Like some secrets exist in the world that'll never be found. The light of a bonfire will offer you safety. But for wardens and players, principles like work together, if you're, or like kind of think, paraphrasing, combat might not be the best solution, even in a world like Runecairn, where death is at the end. So sometimes talking ahead of things, or like avoiding combat altogether, is a good approach. And for the wardens, it's like giving your players interesting choices to make, and interesting encounters, not necessarily all combat. So yeah, like guidance on what to expect from the game as a player and as a warden,
nice.
as a GM.
I realize that's included in the book. You also put in the book about your kind of design philosophy, or the design philosophy behind the system as well, which I thought was really interesting. I don't know if you want to talk about a couple of points of those as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's leading on from Cairn and Into the Odd, where it's more like you describe what you want to happen. It's more of a conversation between the warden and the player. So you can describe, like, rather than rolling on every single thing, like, oh, you need to roll for perception, you need to roll for stealth. You just describe what you want to do, and if it makes sense, then you can just do it. You don't have to roll. Like, if there's no consequence for failure, then there's no real point in rolling.
Yes.
Just for the sake of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, stuff like that, where it's like, explain what you're trying to do, and if the warden thinks that there's danger or an element of risk to it, then they'll ask you to roll against one of your ability scores potentially. So there's like strength, dex, wits, and spirit in Runecairn.
Yeah.
So yeah, the kind of core abilities, and then if you roll your score under, then you succeed. If not, then you fail, and there's like a consequence for that.
I think that's really good advice for almost any system as well, because I think it's so important that if there's something that your players can do or information you want them to have, don't hide it behind a roll or a test, because there's a chance they can fail that. And then if you're trying to give them this clue and they don't get it and they fail the roll, then where do you go? So I think that's really great advice in general as well. Another thing I want to say, and the first thing that caught my eye when I was walking around the UK Games Expo, is how the book looks. It's very, very pretty. Did you do the illustrations and the design or artwork, or?
So I did some of the art inside. The cover is from Crom, who's this amazing London-based artist. He did the cover for Artifact as well. And he does Bird King for Dark Horse Comics. Does amazing art.
Amazing.
But great stuff. I did some of the art inside, and also some of it is public domain. But I've taken the public domain images and like kind of grimed them up and essentially photo bashed them. The piece of art on the screen right now is that one's mine, the bonfire scene. And then the little image next to it is some Viking Age art. There's an artist named Jonas Lau Markussen who does like art that's based on real Viking Age art from like the 900s to like the 1200s. So there's like little pieces of that art inside. But yeah, I think the layout, the design of the layout is me. I was inspired by Ewan Nor's Into the Odd remastered. So some of the art, the public domain art, it's amazing stuff you can do with it. That one there, the green image, that's a public domain piece, but I've added extra texture to it, given it like multiple colors, like a multicolor pass on it. So yeah, there's some cool stuff you can do.
Amazing. I think art in tabletop RPGs is really great because it really helps set the tone and kind of the setting for the game sometimes with the actual book, because somebody's first experience with a game is usually sitting down and reading it to get an understanding of kind of what it is. Did you have any particular guiding thoughts or philosophies regarding, the visual aspects of the game and the art and the layout?
Yeah, I didn't want it to be too like raw, like blood and guts Viking, that sort of thing. Like although the cover the cover is very dynamic and striking.
Yes, and lots of blood on it.
Yeah, but I also wanted it to be colorful, and didn't want the typical like there's some Viking Age imagery or some like Norse imagery has been co-opted by fascists and by like racist movements and that sort of thing. And I wanted to avoid that. I don't want that, because that isn't what I make. That isn't who I make things for. So I wanted to avoid that like hard-edged blood and guts type of style. I don't want it to be a bit.
Is that hence the pink on the cover as well?
Exactly. Yeah. Having a like strong, colorful like colors and colorful imagery, I think helps. Because people will see that and they won't like, it'll be an indicator of like, this may or may not be for you. Looking at the art, like if you want one type of game, then there are other games out there. This might not be the one for you.
Well, it definitely caught my eye when I was walking around the hall, and it definitely felt like a game for me. So I think it definitely did its job for sure.
Awesome.
If people have been listening to this and are interested in getting a copy of the game, it's out and available now. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, you can get it from my web shop, shop.biodenspiritRPG.com. It's also available at a few other UK stores like Dungeonland. And it's if you're in the US, it's available at Exalted Funeral, or will be shortly. And there's some other shops in the US that it's available to. If you want the PDF, it's on itch and DriveThruRPG as well.
Perfect. Lots of places to get that. But this isn't the only book in the collection series, is the right day? Could you talk a little bit about the series and what's going on across the whole line?
Sure, yeah. So this is the remastered version. The original came out in zine format a couple of years ago, and this collects what was 3 original zines. There's also a hardcover bestiary, so that adds 100 new monsters that are inspired by Norse mythology. And there's a new one-page dungeon collection called Into the Nine Realms. So that's with some amazing art from Felipe Faria, who does great stuff. So yeah, there's a dungeon on every page, and it's kind of self-contained, set in the world of Runecairn. So you can run those as a one-shot, or run them like as part of a bigger campaign. And everything, like all monsters, are kind of described in the book and everything.
Beautiful. That sounds great. And that's all available in the store. Links is on the screen if you're watching, and also in the podcast show notes if you are listening. We've done a pre-recording today. And so if people have questions or they kind of want to know more, is there a good place online to kind of catch you and ask any questions?
Yeah. So I'm on Twitter and Instagram at BiodenSpiritRPG. I'm around different Discords as well. I post occasionally on TikTok and on YouTube. I do some design streams on YouTube where I talk about upcoming games and design philosophy behind Runecairn and my other game, which is We Deal in Lead.
Perfect. That sounds great. Well, maybe I'll have to get you back on to talk about We Deal in Lead another time. Yeah, I think we're coming up to near the end of our time. So I don't know, is there anything else that we haven't covered about the game, or anything else you'd like to share before we head off for the day?
I think I think we've covered everything, but I'll say that it's if you're looking for a good kind of medium crunchy Norse fantasy game for 2 players, then Runecairn's a good shout, especially if you like Cairn or Into the Odd.
Yeah, for sure. I do have one last question for you, though, that I ask everybody. And if you have any other tabletop RPGs that you'd like to give a shout out to, or anything you've been enjoying recently. And the rules are, it can't be a game you've made, and it can't be D&D.
Absolutely. So there's a lot to choose from, because the UK independent scene in particular is thriving at the moment. So many good games out there. Something that is amazing, and I just got was Eat the Reich from Rowan Rook and Deckard. Which is basically you play vampires on a mission to drink Hitler's blood in World War II.
Yes.
And in a similar vein, there's pun intended, there's a new book coming out from Soul Muppet called Paint the Town Red, which looks amazing. It's a similar, like, I think Zach describes it as sad gay vampires. So it's a different kind of experience, but it's going to be really good.
Yeah, they did Soul Muppet also do Sad Space Cowboys, so now sad gay vampires as well. So
exactly, yeah.
You can be anything as long as it's sad. Fantastic. That's great. That's some great recommendations. Thank you very much. And Colin, thank you so much for coming on the show. It would be great to have you back to talk about your other games in the future.
Cool, absolutely.
Yeah. Fantastic. And thank you to everyone that's watched or listened. If any of this has sounded interested, please do go have a look on the shop by Odin's Beard, because the best way to support indie tabletop RPG creators is to buy their stuff. And on that note, I think that's all we have time for this week. So thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you. See you later.